Wolfland, Scandinavia, the 19th century. This one does feel kind of Scandinavian. Tanith Lee's Scandinavia and Tanith Lee's Russia occasionally do sort of meld in. So I've just finished Wolfland. I finished it last night. That is the 7th of the 9 stories in Red as Blood, or Tales from the Sisters Grimmer, by Tanith Lee, that I've been working through. I believe you'll have heard the first story in this compilation, Pied Piper, Asia, the last century BC. This is one that I discussed with Chris and Rod. That should be live streaming somewhere. Wolfland, unsurprisingly, is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. And also unsurprisingly, it's very Tanith Lee unusual. So one thing going into this story that I did wonder, I think many of us will have seen The Company of Wolves. The Company of Wolves was a really fascinating, eerie, scary, and erotic-ish movie. It was based on Angela Carter's story, The Company of Wolves. And it was really quite exceptional. And reading this, I did wonder if there was a relationship between Angela Carter's and Tanith Lee's retellings of Little Red Riding Hood. It seems there wasn't. The stories came out around about the same time, but it doesn't seem that there was any overlap, except in that both Angela Carter and Tanith Lee were writing in what literary people like to call the same space. They were running through retellings of fairy tales with a dark lens and often with feminist viewpoints. So if you like Angela Carter and you've never read any Tanith Lee, I think Red as Blood, as well as some of her other stories, would be very much up your alley. If you've read Tanith Lee but you haven't read this short story collection, also. Plus, it's a door. It's a beautiful door. Show us your doors. So this story definitely subverts wolfy type stories, and it subverts the notion of the werewolf in traditional fairy tale mythology. It shifts away from that man-beast construct, which is very much, what is my bird doing? A part of fairy tales and mythology. The whole notion that a human being is part man, part beast, and Beauty and the Beast, and all the werewolf stories are combinations of those factors. Where are we going here? We're going to choose something, aren't we? As long as it's not a book. It probably is a book. Now, what Tanith Lee did in Wolfland was something quite different. And we go into this as readers knowing something about this story purely based on its title. But we start with a happy and willful young woman. She is living her life in a city. Her mother died at her birth. And I can't find the story. I wanted to read the first bit of it. Page 106-ish. So I'm reading these stories not in order, just whichever one appeals to me most of the time. And it starts with, when the summons arrived from Anna the matriarch, Liesel did not wish to obey. The twilight winter had already come, and the great snows were down, spreading their aprons of shining ice, turning the trees to crystal candelabra. Liesel wanted to stay in the city. So she's a city girl, she's happy, she's well off, she goes skating, she goes to parties, she stays up all night, then sleeps until midday. Her mother died when she was young, and hers is the life of high society and ballrooms and enjoying herself. I think she's 16, and she has only met her grandmother, Anna, her mother's mother, the one time at her birth, which of course she doesn't remember. Since then, she's lived in the city, even though there's a recognition of the fact that Liesel is Anna's sole inheritor, and that everything that she owns, from the chateau out of town to all the wealth, will be hers. Her father is indulgent and lets Liesel do whatever she likes, but when this summon comes from her grandmother, They both know that she's going to do it, even though they say you don't have to, and she says I don't want to. They both know she will. The summons comes in the form of a letter wrapped in the most amazing red cloak with a red hood. It has got brocade on the hood, and there's the symbol of the flower, which is her grandmother Anna's crest symbol, one of those things. Now, Liesl goes to in a coach with accompaniment sent by her father, but they're met halfway through the wood in this dark winter wilderness by another coach that is her grandmother's coach, and they say, your company isn't required, you can just come to this coach. And Liesl does eventually send her father's coach and her father's accompaniment back to town and continues in this coach. So when she gets there, she's essentially isolated in this wintry chateau surrounded by gates and walls and has no allies there. She immediately on arrival, she has an interview with her grandmother in which her grandmother talks about some weird stuff. The gate to the grounds, by the way, is always open, and you can hear wolves in the countryside. The wolves in the countryside actually joined the coach as she was driving Liesl back to her grandmother's place, with wolves running on all the sides of it. It's an exceptional story, and it is definitely a reversal of traditional werewolf tales. A small part of me doesn't want to spoiler this any more than to say, if you like fairy tale retellings, you should definitely read this one. But if you think you're going to, you should go away and do that. It was apparently also published in Journal of the Fantastic in the Arts in 1989. And my understanding is that it is available free to download online. So if you are intrigued by anything Tanith Lee that you have heard so far, you should definitely go and get that. It's got some nice illustrations by Randy Elliott, I believe. Anyhow, go read that, because the rest is spoilers. So we as readers rapidly recognize that the grandmother is something unusual. She seems young for her age and at the same time old for her age. Her main company is a dwarf, human growth hormone reduced human, but with the name of Beautiful, who's got this angelic face but is quite tiny. And he obviously worships Anna. At one stage, Liesl gives him an order and he says, apologies, but I obey the matriarch, not you. And after dinner, they go to bed early, and the dinner scene is tense because while Liesl is served delicious food, her grandmother is served these chunks of raw meat. So we all know what's happening here, right? Clearly, Anna, her grandmother, is the werewolf. And when Liesl, unsettled and unhappy, wakes up in the middle of the night and goes downstairs, she sees a door being opened and a wolf slinking into the house. Earlier in the evening, she already heard the front door being opened, and from her bedroom window saw a pale wolf slinking out into the night. We realize it's the grandmother. Liesl doesn't. She just thinks her grandmother is keeping wolves as pets, though there isn't a long time before she's told the truth. And in actual fact, one of the things that I like about Tanith Lee characters is how much the characters can be non-sugary. I think the grandmother tells her she's not a very smart young woman. It's like, don't be silly, I am the wolf. Yeah, that's right, your grandmother is a wolf. And Liesl is a very spoilt young girl. She's used to having her own way. She doesn't like being isolated. She devises a plan to subvert Madame's coach driver to take her back to the city, and it goes nowhere. And it's clear to us that pretty much all the servants must know what her grandmother is, and that is confirmed by her grandmother eventually. So it's a weird off-kilter story, but it is far better in terms of narrative progression than some of Tanith Lee's stories. The last one I reviewed on my own was Black as Ink, which leaves you with all questions and confusion and no conclusions. This one gives you narrative, traditional story writing progression, and it gives you all the answers you need. They are delivered beautifully and weirdly. So after that night where there's a wolf wandering around that proves to be the grandmother takes Liesel into the parlor, serves her with a special liqueur made from a local flower, and we as readers are going, don't drink it, don't drink it. But Liesel thinks, how bad can it be? It all came from the same carafe, and her grandmother is also drinking it, therefore it can't be poisoned. Of course it isn't poisoned. And her grandmother tells her this story about how the mythology of the area, about how the chateau was once not ruled by her, but by her husband, grandpère, who beat her. And we get Liesel experiences a flashback of that time, presumably through the agency of this liqueur made of local flowers, about the violence in her grandfather, his fear of the same flowers that made this liqueur, the mythology around it, and his treatment of his wife Anna. Now Anna puts up with a lot, but she does eventually give birth to a daughter who she sends away, and the final act in her personal story from many years ago is when grandpère, her husband, discovers where her daughter is hidden and says she can be brought back to the chateau to be brought up with the loving kindness of her father. And that's when Anna, as a young woman of, I believe, 30, breaks. And she takes what she's learned from the servants who are sympathetic to her. She takes the mythology, she takes the flowers, she eats them. She prays in a circle to the full moon. And the goddess of werewolves, or whatever, comes to her, and then as her husband is stumbling back drunk from the pub in the village, a wolf gets him. It's a fantastic story. It's dark, it's gothic, it's horror in the best sort of the way, and that story alone gives you all the answers that you need for the final act. Now, Liesel was sitting there taking it all in, thinking, well, maybe my grandmother's a wolf, but more likely she's a crazy lunatic. And then the grandmother says to her, yes, and you're the next in line. So there's a little bit of the idea of losing your soul because you've done something like that. 19th century, so it's post-Christianity. And when at the end of the story, Liesel actually says, so you became this thing, and what happens in the afterlife? And Anna goes, well, I don't know. But having drunk this drink, Liesel is now the inheritor of this curse, blessing, progression. She is now the werewolf, and she takes onto herself all the soul condemnation, perhaps, that was attributed to Anna's soul. Anna tells her, I think I'm going to die within the year. Don't sell the chateau, you can't, you now belong here. And you are now the next inheritor of this werewolf. My daughter didn't have it. I knew, which is why I left her in the city. But the second I saw you, I knew you were the next. So you've got this fatalism, you've got this dark destiny. And then you've got, in your last images, you've got Anna standing in the hall, smelling the outdoor, the ice. And it's clear that the magic of the liqueur has worked its magic on her, and this is now her place. And at the end, we finally get a validation of that. Then a wolf sung in the forest. She lifted her head. She suddenly knew frost and running and black stillness and a platinum moon, red feasts and wild hewings, lovers and with quicksilver eyes, and the race of the ice wind and stars smashed under the hard soles of her 4 feet. And as a recognition, while she's standing in the hall, all the servants from the chateau have gathered around and are looking at her. And the last thing is Beautiful, who had knelt only to her grandmother, has knelt and was kissing the hem of her red cloak. She patted his head absently, and the gathering of the servants sighed. It is goosebumps. It is a goosebump story. But if you didn't like some of Tanith Lee's more wild flights of fantasy, you should like this one because the narrative style is very traditional, or at least as traditional as anything that Tanith Lee ever did. Tanith Lee had another werewolf folklore series, that's the Lycanthia series. I have read them, it was a while ago, I don't think I've reviewed them. But werewolf mythology, when this was written in the late 70s, early 80s-ish, was definitely changing away from the more traditional. And I would argue that the traditional fairy tale mythology, werewolf stories were scary, but in the 70s and 80s, the narratives was being flipped for a modern audience that actually makes it more scary for us reading it today, because it's a whole different thing. And it talks to our inner fears in the way the older mythology talked to the inner fears of the people those stories were being told by and to. Thank you for watching. As I run through Red as Blood or Tales from the Sisters Grimmer, I would thoroughly recommend Wolfland to anyone who likes Tanith Lee. If you are still watching and you haven't read it, give it a while and forget it. If it was me, I'd forget this review in a week. But give it a few weeks, find a Tanith Lee, and of the short stories in this collection so far, I think I've only got 1 or 2 left to go. I think really Wolfland is my favourite so far. That's a 5 out of 5 star story. It doesn't put a foot wrong. It does everything you want from a werewolf story. It does everything that you want from the characters involved, in my personal opinion. All of these reviews are my personal opinion. You are free to form your own. In fact, you are encouraged to. Go out, read books, especially read good books. Bye.